Morning, everyone. We are live again, continuing our series from the museum. I'm Andrew Kircher, the Community Engagement Manager for Port Huron Museums. Looking both ways as I cross a pretty empty street here, but we are going to do another one of our little field trips. I was out on a walk. It's pretty nice out, of course, by myself, staying very socially distant. But I thought it'd be another good time to look at another couple of iconic buildings. And I've been thinking about buildings to look at. And there are some great examples that we're going to come across in just a little bit here. So I'm going to flip the camera around. I think we'll probably get a couple people to join us. We've got a couple already watching. So if you got any questions or comments, throw them up as you watch. I see Todd's watching. Hi, Todd. All right, so the buildings that I want to look at today are downtown. My aunt's watching. I can see and say hello to her. All right, so the buildings I want to look at are ones that we all kind of recognize. We've got the Federal building here. And this one's pretty neat because this is actually the oldest federal building in the state of Michigan that's still used by the federal government. We don't think about, I guess we do think about Michigan as a border, or Port Huron as a border city today, but it was especially important in the 19th century. A lot of people don't realize that Port Huron was actually second to Ellis Island for processing new immigrants into the United States. If you were coming from Europe, it was actually a lot cheaper to take a train or take a boat to Canada and then a train from Canada into the middle of the United States. So if you were moving to the Midwest, there's a good chance that some of your ancestors probably passed through Port Huron and were processed at a customs building, just like this one. Now, this building has a nice little, this is a great example of how you can have an addition to a building. See, this one-story thing is an addition that was added in the 1930s, but you see it blends in really, really well with the original building. Now, stylistically, this building is definitely a product of the 1870s. Kind of like if you've been watching some of these, we've talked about, an architect can use architecture to kind of tell a story, to put some ideas in your head. And that was definitely true with this building. It's a federal building. You want it to look important and imposing. This is not something for a vernacular or a common style. You want this building to kind of project the might and the power of the federal government. And we're a democracy, of course, a republic. So a lot of times in the United States, you see references to Greece and Rome, which we kind of see as our democratic forebearers, as it were. So this building is kind of a Renaissance revival. So you can see it's got a couple of pretty neat features here. Some of the terms I think we've used before. These, they're not really columns because they're still attached to the building. They're called pilasters. They go all the way up there. They've got a nice little cornice on top with some more of those kind of, those aren't really acanthus leaves, but kind of a nice design. We've got our triangular pediment there with some big brackets holding everything up. And it's, of course, made out of stone. And this bottom floor has got these great big blocks on the bottom. So it looks, very, very imposing standing underneath it. I'm going to step back a little bit so we can look at, that's, very much kind of a classical revival in a lot of the pieces that it's using, all of those nice little details. But if we back up, and of course I'm watching where I'm stepping here, we can also see the cupola. So that's what this is called on top. The cupola is this big round part on top, and it has a mansard roof. We talked about this with the Italianates in the last video I did. Those mansard roofs were very popular in the 1870s. And, you know, they continue to be used. Sometimes in buildings they're still built today. But that really tells you a lot. The 1870s, that's when this building was built. The cupola's got that roof that comes down on the sides. It's got a very kind of vertical element to the roof rather than horizontal. And it's copper clad. If you haven't seen that, it used to be really green because it sat there for a very long time. Now it's this great coppery brown. They did some amazing restoration work on this last summer, if you watch it. So that's a great way of mixing very classical things on the lower building with something that was very contemporary when the building was built, with the cupola or the dome up there on top. Now, this building used to have a great big fountain out in front. People actually got sick of the fountain in like the 1920s and 30s. They said that it was such a vigorous fountain that it sprayed people as they were walking by on the street. Now, if you had been here even 70 years ago, this streetscape across from the Federal Building would have looked very, very different. Good morning to some of our watchers there. We're always glad to have you. And I thought that this particular little triangle of land we're on can kind of tell us a lot about architecture and a lot about the evolution of some of the buildings here in downtown. So this building, of course, has been here since the 1870s, very classically inspired. But I want to talk about a movement we haven't really seen yet in any of these. And this is, of course, Art Deco. This is one of my favorite buildings in town. This is the AT&T building. Obviously had an addition here a little bit later and a different kind of style. I couldn't tell you exactly when that's from. But this actual part of the building is definitely from the 1920s, 1929 if I remember the corner block correctly. And it is Art Deco all the way. And you might wonder, you know, how do you define Art Deco? How is Art Deco different? Well, it tells you a little bit about what's going on with building materials. This is even cooler in person than it shows up on the phone. This cool kind of marble here. So Art Deco is something that comes about in the 20th century. And the idea behind it is that new building materials have come along. So we see all of these different kinds of ideas like, you know, Gothic and classical buildings like this. They go back like 1,000 years, 2,000 years, the Greeks and the Romans, because everybody's working with fundamentally the same building materials. By the 20th century, that's right, all right, 1929, Bell Telephone Building. By the 20th century, they have new types of materials to use. They have things like reinforced concrete, and they're not going to try and hide them anymore. I'm going to walk across the street here so we can see it a little bit better in a larger view. So with these new materials, architects are saying, well, why are we trying to build these old style buildings with new materials? You wouldn't build a grass hut out of concrete. You would build something completely different. And with something different, we're going to have a different kind of ornamentation, something that hasn't been seen before. You even look at the little hall next to it here, and you can tell this one's got you know, made out of brick here. It's got these classical columns built in. Again, they're constantly referring to the Greeks, the Romans, the people who had come before, these classical elements. This wasn't so much a rejection of that, it's just a completely different idea, saying, hey, we've got new materials. It's the 20th century. Things are happening. We can do different styles. So you see lots of parallel lines. You see lots of designs, kind of like you see above the doors there. You still see some of the same kind of elements, like, you know, great big windows. That doesn't really go away, but the style has changed a lot. Art Deco really comes from the 1920s into the late teens, but the name itself comes from a French exposition, like the arts, decorative arts, and in French the words kind of get flipped around and shortened, so that Art Deco movement. Art Deco is something that I'm sure there are quite a few textbook definitions for, but I've always said it's one of those things, you know it when you see it. Things like the Chrysler Building or the Empire State Building. These are items that don't hide that they're using these modern materials. They still have lots of nice ornamentation on them. They can be very pretty, but they kind of reject that classical structure on them, like you see again on the Federal Building. Now there is one other building that, since we're right in this kind of triangle, that I wanted to talk a little bit about, It's over here. It's the, well, it's now the Chemical Bank building. So this building dates to the late 70s, like 1977, 78, something like this. And this is a modern building. And the style, you notice, is quite a bit different from the previous two that we have looked at today. This building, it's completely different in material as well as form. You know, so this isn't square. It's not using any of those pieces of architectural vocabulary that the other buildings were using. This one is round. It's got this cool little pedestrian tunnel, again, out of even more modern materials. So if Art Deco is an embracement of things like reinforced concrete, this is the love of heavy glass, industrial glass, and other products that come about in like the middle of the 20th century. So it's got this kind of completely different form that doesn't really look like anything that had come before it when you compare it to, you know, these other older buildings. Now, one of the reasons this building is here, we can appreciate it today, but it's also kind of a sad story, at least I think so. In the 1960s, there was an idea called urban renewal. And if you're familiar with those two words, for most historic preservationists like myself, they're very, very scary. I mentioned earlier that this entire streetscape looked very different 70 years ago. It had a lot more older buildings, kind of like the rest of downtown. But the powers that be at the time were concerned that these buildings were getting run down. People had moved out into the suburbs, as it were. Port Huron doesn't really have suburbs, but people had expanded out into the township and Fort Gratiot areas, and this downtown core was being neglected. So what did they do? They tore it down. It's kind of sad. Like I said, we lost a lot of historic buildings, but it did open up the way, and that's how you see this kind of new wave of modern buildings. Now, the other thing you see with these modern buildings is very little in the form of ornamentation. You see on that Art Deco building, there are like big carvings above the door and that great beautiful work. This is very much like form follows function. This is a functional building, and any kind of decoration just comes from the fact that it's kind of a big circle, and that's kind of unusual. Doesn't look like anything else in the area. So I figured those three buildings were right there in a triangle. They made for some really good comparisons with each other. Again, we've got like the 1970s and then the 1870s, and just a huge amount of change in that 100 years in what you see in architecture. So I've been talking for quite a bit. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them up in the comments. Again, if you're just joining us, my name is Andrew Kircher. I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Port Huron Museums. I really like old buildings, as you can probably tell. Architecture is something that's, I think, fascinating, and the coolest part about it is we all have some in our backyard. It is a really nice warm day out. As long as you stay by yourself, you don't head out, you can go out and take a walk in your neighborhood, see what you can see. We've looked at some houses. We've looked at, these are kind of all public buildings. I think maybe a little preview of one of the next ones we might look at is way over there. We might take a look at the beautiful Alden Dow designed McMorran complex. I think there's some cool stuff we can say about that, or maybe St. Clair County Community College. Those are definitely options to go and look at. We've got these cool little things, which I'll be completely frank with you, I'm not sure what they are. I've never looked at them that closely before. If you know, throw them up in the comments. But they look a lot like what's on top of the bank, so I imagine maybe they are related in some way. Again, it's got that kind of very modernist look to them. Looks like it's probably maybe a little ATM? I don't know. There are doors into this. So that is our mystery of the day. If you know what these are, please tell me, because I don't know. They're kind of neat, though. Like I said, they blend in nicely with the Chemical Bank. All right, so again, thanks for coming on our little walk for the day. If you enjoy these, you like what you're seeing, feel free to share them out with people. We are we are really close. We're like 50 people away from having 10,000 likes on our Facebook page. And I think that is really cool. I'd love to see that many people engaging and liking local history. Because when it comes down to it, all history is local. And I think the Blue Water area has some of the greatest history in the state. I really enjoy it, and I can tell a lot of you do as well. So if you've got other ideas. All right, well, my mom just commented. She says it's an ATM shelter. I didn't see an ATM in there, so, or how you get into it. Maybe those doors were unlocked. It's a good question. Maybe I'll go back and check. I don't want the bank to look at me, jimmying a bunch of doors if that's not really where an ATM is. While I'm walking back right here, I know this one might be a little bit longer than the others, but we can also see another area that's kind of a victim to that urban renewal. The west side right here, Military Street, there were lots and lots of buildings there, and they were all torn down and replaced by the Times Herald building, this big piece of concrete that's very functional, doesn't have a lot of ornamentation or design to it, because it's just a building you use. So maybe we'll take a look at some of those buildings of the past and do like a compare and contrast or something like that. We will see. But again, if you like what you're seeing, share this with others, tell other people about it. These have been kind of enjoyable to make, because it's gotten me at least to go on some walks. Another thing you could do is you can support the Port Huron Museums directly in our mission to bring this history to you, preserve it, and share it. And you can do that. You can pick up a ticket. I know everybody's probably going to be chomping at the bit to get out of their house this summer once this is all over. You can buy a ticket to our sites right now. You can take a look at the Port Huron Museum website, phmuseum.org. You can buy a Huron Experience Pass, which actually gets you into each of our historic sites, or a membership. And the cool thing about all of these is the money goes directly to helping us out right now, and the membership will be good for a full year from when we're able to reopen. So you'll definitely get to come and see those sites. We really look forward to seeing all of you when that happens. But until then, remember, history is right here in your own backyard, and you can go explore it. So until next time, again, any requests, throw them up. I always love reading the comments, even on the replay when people watch this a little bit later if they're not catching it live. Until then, again, this is Andrew Kircher signing off. Take care.